But I know that when you have this weird behavior, these special favors, a president who gives out pardons for money, which he does, a president who gives out pardons to people who are responsible for the deaths of multiple police officers in DC simply because their violence was for his benefit, when that's what you're up against, then it's pretty daunting. It's pretty intimidating to have to come forward against that person.
All right, we're back. I'm Adam Parkhomenko. With us today is Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner. Larry, thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. It's a beautiful rainy day.
Yeah, congratulations on your decisive win, despite the fact that I think you defeated a Democrat who decided that, maybe they weren't a true Democrat and wanted to keep going.
I defeated a Dempublican. That is correct. Even in the Trump era, after vouching that he was a, quote, lifelong Democrat, unquote, he decided not to be a lifelong Democrat and become a Republican more recently. I think there's a word for that, opportunism or something like that. But anyway, that's what's happening.
Well, it's nice to weed that out before somebody gets elected, as we've learned, through multiple other people. Sometimes we find out a year or two later, things change. And again, I know you're running for re-election, but congratulations. And thank you for all you've been doing. I wanted to start by playing your campaign, your re-election ad, and then just talking a little bit more about your background for folks that, don't know. Something that's really important to me is we can't take anything for granted. I grew up in Virginia. There's not a lot of elections in these off years. Virginia has an election every year, but we have key elections, obviously, in places like Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Virginia. And, it's really important not just to make sure we come out and vote and get you reelected, but it's also just a great process to, make sure that people's voter registrations are in good shape and all that kind of stuff. So we'll start with the ad. And then I got a couple questions for you.
For 7 years, I've stood up for Philadelphia, worked to lower crime, focused on violence prevention, gotten justice for victims and the accused, made the system fair, exonerated almost 50 people wrongfully convicted, protected democracy. Some people don't like that. Trump and his billionaire buddies, the shooting groups and gun lobby, the old system that denied people justice for too long. They can come for Philly, but I'm not backing down. They can F around and find out.
So first of all, I love the ad. I have loved the ad since you launched it, and I love how you talk. It's one of the things that we've done at the alt media for, I think, 6 or 7 years. We got a lot of criticism for, even using the initial F. But I think a lot of Democrats throughout the country have started to kind of follow in your footsteps. This was long before we started to hear from even some of the governors that have sort of changed their tune in the way that they're talking. Can you talk a little bit more about your background, when you first won, and sort of why you stepped up to serve?
Sure. Public school kid. Interesting. You and I were chatting before. My dad's people were immigrants from Ukraine. They were, Jewish immigrants to the United States. My mom's people actually were from a totally different background. She became a tent preacher. So let's just say exposed to a lot of influences early on. Born in St. Louis, went to public schools in St. Louis, then went to public schools in the Philadelphia area. My dad became physically disabled as he got older. Super hardworking, bright guy, World War II veteran, volunteered, but he became physically disabled. So in high school, it was food stamps. It was SSDI that was supporting the family. So I came out of, public school with a chip on my shoulder, a little bit of an attitude, went to college in Chicago, got picked for a death penalty jury, actually, before I went to law school. And it had a lot to do with my going to law school. Came out of there, wanted to do criminal justice, which has fascinated me since I was 10 years old. And here I am, 38 years into my career. I spent 30 of them doing criminal defense and civil rights work for individuals. And I've spent the last almost 8 as the chief prosecutor in Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's a great background. And obviously I can relate on the parent side. My dad came over from then West Germany through a newly reopened Ellis Island on a cargo ship. And my mother came over here as an adult from England. So first generation, born in Washington, D.C. randomly. But my degree from George Mason University is in criminal justice. I've always had a big passion for giving back to the community and law enforcement. I was a reserve with DC Police MPD for 15 years, where I worked actually with Michael Fanone. We were both assigned to 1D pretty much for our entire careers. But it's a difficult job, and it's when you talked about sitting on that jury, which sort of motivated you to go to law school. I had a similar situation, and I've taken the LSATs twice, but I've never sort of pulled that trigger. Although it seems like maybe it's slightly easier nowadays after COVID to kind of do some more remote classes. But I have a great deal of respect for not just the work that you do, but the way that you speak. And even though, it is an elected position where you run as a Democrat, you've come across very objective and a fighter. You put politics aside and really focus on the victims. You've had a number of tweets that I noticed because I spent 3 years working at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and you've been very outspoken as well on the Epstein case. Can you talk just a little bit more, not just on sort of what you think is going on there and sort of the things that are being hidden, but also then maybe pivot to kind of broader. I think you've been spot on in terms of ICE and what you would be doing if federal law enforcement were violating laws just like anyone else in your community.
Well, sure. It ain't complicated. If there's a vicious ring of pedophiles, which includes some billionaires, any decent prosecutor should be all over that. You're not supposed to kowtow to money and power. You're supposed to go after it with equal zeal. Pedophilia is a horrific crime. The molestation, trafficking in young girls, this is a horrific crime. It shouldn't be an issue at all where there's any hesitation. And yet we find ourselves with, Trump and Jeff Epstein, best friendsies, love each other a lot, send each other cards. And we all know what was going on that island in terms of Epstein. The whole thing's repulsive. You have a supposed Attorney General of the United States who has a list on her desk and then it magically disappears. It's just repulsive. If it's a very, very long pattern of hatred of women on the part of Donald Trump, sadly, and none of us should accept it. Now, having said that, we also got to be realists. When you have Donald Trump, someone who has repeatedly been charged with and even convicted of documentary fraud, holding documents he shouldn't have. Let's not be naive. We all know that if he can destroy documents that incriminate him, he's going to destroy them. The leverage here is not going to be to demand that he do a decent thing for the first time in his life and give up a list that he doesn't have to give up. The leverage is going to be whether other people have the evidence, other people have the list. And in that situation, he'll do everything he can to stop its release, but it will come out through other sources, as we saw, for example, with a particular birthday card that came out. I could go on and on, but why? We all know what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with a serial compulsive liar. We're dealing with a sociopath who sadly is president of the United States. And we just have to be realistic about making every lawful, appropriate effort to stop his agenda.
Can you talk a little more too, just about in terms of the work that you do every day, what it's like to be, because there's a lot of victims that are speaking out, and obviously, Ro Khanna and Tom Massey, two completely different people. We'll see what ends up happening with the number of votes, being won away for the work that they're doing on the House floor. But can you talk a little bit about what it's like to be a victim? And most folks don't realize when a victim comes forward, many times they're being re-victimized, having to tell this story over and over again or hear about their story. So just the sort of the courage for the number of people that are stepping forward, that's not easy, right?
No, it's incredibly difficult. It's been a real emphasis of the work we do. We actually doubled the number of personnel who address victim witness issues in the office. We've fought hard to get the first money increases in 15 years for outside victim services agencies. And the dynamic for a victim of sexual assault is unique, in some ways uniquely bad. There are so many issues around it that make it incredibly difficult for a victim of sexual abuse to come forward. There's the fear of what will happen in the courtroom. There's the fear of retaliation. There is sometimes an internalized sense of shame that is not appropriate, but it's just, sadly, it's part of the consequence of this terrible violation that can be there. I'm not going to suggest to you that I'm the world's biggest expert on this, but some of our prosecutors who do this work have dedicated their entire careers to it. They're deeply committed to it. And it is a major factor in how cases get resolved. There are times when we have to resolve cases with a guilty plea for, less of a consequence than we want, because it is so harmful to the victims, especially young victims, to have to come into court, to relive it, to have to go over the details, to be cross-examined about it. And we do that because where appropriate, we do it because it is so important that they're able to survive the process, that they're able to recover as much as they possibly can. The violation itself is almost limitless harm, but when you have to relive it, and you have to relive it in the context of accusing a president of the United States or a billionaire who has fingers in everything and everybody, it just becomes almost an insurmountable problem. Just look at the woman who described her experience with now Justice, pardon me for saying Justice because it hurts, but now Justice Kavanaugh. Just look at what she went through. Just look at what was endured by Clarence Thomas's victim. It's, we are where we are. It is all as bad as it looks. We should continue to demand transparency, but you're never going to get that from Donald Trump. If he's got a bonfire, it's already burnt. What you're going to get here, hopefully, is enough evidence will accumulate from other sources so that we have a clearer picture of this, pedophile ring that was run by Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, who, of course, now is being rewarded every way you can reward someone who covers for you. And there's no question that she's covering for the president of the United States in one way or another. I'm not telling you I know exactly what Donald Trump did, but I know that when you have this weird behavior, these special favors, a president who gives out pardons for money, which he does, a president who gives out pardons to people who are responsible for the deaths of multiple police officers in DC simply because their violence was for his benefit, when that's what you're up against, then it's pretty daunting. It's pretty intimidating to have to come forward against that person.
Yeah. And you mentioned the binders earlier. It is very strange to have watched Donald Trump and his team run a campaign on, bringing the truth to the Jeffrey Epstein case and releasing the files and all that kind of stuff, to then have, a week ago, can't believe his FBI director, Kash Patel, sit there and respond to, of all people, Senator Kennedy, and say, that they have no evidence that Jeffrey Epstein trafficked women or girls to anyone or was working with anyone but himself. Which is, one, it's kind of like, then why is Maxwell there? But two, we know that's not true. So I guess my question is, in terms of the disinformation that is coming out, one, I don't think I've ever seen someone perjure themselves as much as Patel did. But as Senator Booker said, it's probably not, they're not going to see him at another hearing unless he's being investigated later. Does the disinformation that's being put out there, for example, everyone suggests that, the Clintons, who I worked with for 15 years, had Jeffrey Epstein killed. The lack of education and the disinformation being Donald Trump was president, and Bill Barr was the head of the FBI when Jeffrey Epstein died. Whatever happened there, he died under their watch. The disinformation to me comes across almost as sort of these Cold War tactics from the FBI to sow doubt. My dad said as a kid, conspiracy theories and criminal conspiracies are two completely different things, but it seems oftentimes Republicans are using these conspiracy theories to cover from the criminal conspiracies that they're involved in. How does that affect the work that you do every day in terms of the disinformation that we're seeing when it comes to, whether it's a high profile case or trying to pick a jury to get it right?
Well, I am blessed to be in Philly where, despite what others who don't know the city may think, we have uniquely capable juries in my experience. I say that after 30 years of being a very busy trial lawyer, state and federal court, more than one area. And they're very three-dimensional in the sense that a lot of Philadelphia families have someone who's actually served a bunch of time in jail. They have somebody else who is in law enforcement, and they have someone else who's been the victim of a serious crime. So they understand that you have to really try to get at the truth. This administration's at war with the truth, like any dictator. And he is a wannabe dictator. Donald Trump is at war with the truth. So he constantly engages in horrific violations of our norms, some of them moral, some of them legal, and then out of nowhere casts blame at someone else. He basically projects every bad thing that he is or was or is doing on someone else falsely in almost every single situation. It is one more distraction tactic. We're ultimately dealing with someone who came out of a reality show. And of course, reality shows are completely fake. That's the whole point. He came out of a reality show and then he became a reality politician. It is sad to say, but some of his followers ain't too bright, just like he can't really form a sentence. Therefore, we know the sentence on that card was signed by him because it's not grammatical in the same fashion. They are not too good at thinking in linear ways, and they have in many ways been corrupted by reality shows become reality as an aspect of our culture.
Yeah, and two things on that. One, it is interesting how quick they are, Republicans, to constantly on the political side seem to at least be on message until they get a question that's like, okay, if that's on a signature, why are you not investigating who has been taking the president's signature and signing it on things and so forth, right? Wouldn't you be the first to get to it? But secondly, I just want to compliment you for a second. What you just said about the three-dimensional kind of approach or thought process of the jury in Philadelphia, to me, is very interesting. I've never heard someone describe it that way, and I feel like we can relate a lot to that right now in Washington, D.C. Although I'm in the area, I still think the best ideas come from outside of DC, but I've been very proud to see a number of the grand juries not buy what this administration is selling. And, the grand juries usually come back with what they used to say, right? They could indict a ham sandwich or something like that, but they didn't indict the guy that, threw the ham sandwich from Subway. So it gives me a lot of confidence because folks in DC, especially, they remember, the crack epidemic and when PCP was through the roof, and you had a number of folks that were signing up to join the police department, and folks, had family members that were working in public education and public service and in the police department, and then had some family members that got tied up in other stuff, but they know when someone is bullshitting them. And I think that if anything is sort of kind of protecting the what is the still sort of a experiment that is the United States. It seems to me that some of these grand juries and the people that step up and get weeded out and stay within the jurors are the ones that really are protecting what is our democracy.
I think you're absolutely right about that. There's a very interesting historical perspective here, and some of it comes from Australia. But when you ask a jury to do something that is extremely authoritarian and that feels fundamentally unfair to them, they will sometimes nullify. In other words, sure, there's evidence this guy threw a sandwich, but I don't care. He shouldn't have been fired. This government is out of control. They're trying to crush someone for an act that we all know is physically harmless. I ain't doing it. I'm not indicting. This is very similar to what happened in Australia, which of course was a country that was founded to a large extent based upon sending prisoners there, right? They have these incredibly draconian laws. You steal bread, you lose your life, or you lose a limb, or you lose a hand. And they would try these cases in Australia, and the juries would be like, nope, sorry. Sure, he stole the bread. I don't care. Not guilty. They would do that.
Yep.
There's also a history in England. I'm not going to go on and on with this stuff. But that is one of the strengths of having a jury system. And it also, I think, really underscores something Pritzker said the other day, which is obvious but important, which is you got a jacked up U.S. Supreme Court. You have a jacked up U.S. legislature. You have jacked up elected officials all over the country who are not doing what they should to save this country. What do you have left? The answer is people. And it is people on those juries. It's not elected officials. It's not legislators. Ultimately, we need to understand that our strength in this time is people, and that we can count on people that so long as we can motivate them, so long as we can put them in a spot where they're not terrified all the time, we can motivate people to save the country, because that's what we have to work with.
Yeah. And I mean, that's so true. It really, no one's coming to save you but yourself. And yourself is, seems to be the one that's stepping up when it comes to these. Two more things. One, I asked some folks sort of what they wanted to find out from you. And I got one question I tried to kind of piece together here, but I thought it was important. Someone had noticed that you had pointed out in the red states that they have a higher homicide rate than blue states over the last sort of 2.5 decades. But the Republican Party still brands itself as tough on crime, right? And the fact that, on January 6th, which you alluded to earlier, they were smearing their feces, in the Capitol and beating police officers, with the American flag, and literally we lost law enforcement lives because of it. How do you think Democrats, and it kind of at this point, I probably shouldn't even say Democrats, because I really do feel like, the folks that are on the right side of history, that are Democrats, are Americans, and the ones really stepping up as true patriots, despite the fact that some people in our party don't like to be called patriots. How do you combat this narrative? Because you're right in terms of what the actual rates are, and we see this not just on homicides, but a number of other things.
Well, you just have to keep telling the truth until people listen. It is a fact that in a country of 350 million people, which is, from the data perspective, an enormous sample, looking over 25 years, which is, again, from a data perspective, an enormous sample, that your chances of getting murdered in a Republican state are much higher than in a Democratic state. More specifically, it's 125% of your chance of being killed in a Democratic state. It is a fact that 24 out of the last 25 years, you were safer in a Democratic state from homicide. And what do we make of it? Well, to be honest, I'm a lifelong Democrat. It's a failure on the part of the Democratic Party. You have let Richard Nixon, a criminal, claim the moral high ground with his vice president, Spiro Agnew, a criminal. You have let Donald Trump, a criminal, 34-time felon, claim that these people have the high ground when it comes to criminal justice issues. They flat out don't. Democrats do what works, and that is they try to help people meet their basic needs. They believe in science, like DNA, which can solve crimes. And Republicans just keep hollering, give out more guns, which endangers us. That's the reality here. So we do have to know these things. We have to say these things. For way too long, my party has been playing Republican light. They kind of look at what Republicans do. They figure out if a shady criminal like Richard Nixon can get elected, I'll say what he said. That is a disaster, and we're seeing its worst consequences.
Yeah, I've said and it's not my quote, I've said for a long time, to your point, that I don't think Republicans win elections. I think Democrats lose them for a number of reasons, the ones that you just mentioned, but so many other things in terms of we spend all this money, on statewide races as opposed to, investing in a race like yours, where, if we're going to bring out voters in school board races or DA races, it's going to impact not just elections during that year, but in future years all across the board. And I feel like we sort of just put all this stuff away after each election and then come back 4 years from now, take it out of the attic and dust it off. So we have a lot of work to do, but I think the general consensus from folks in Philly and even in New Jersey and other places is that you've been doing an incredible job. I wanted to get your response to one clip from Donald Trump today.
But we have a border strong, and we have a shape, and that shape doesn't just go straight up. That shape is amorphous when it comes to the atmosphere. And if we had the most clean air, and I think we do, We have very clean air. We have the cleanest air we've had in many, many years. But the problem is that other countries, like China, which has air that's a little bit rough, it blows. And no matter what you're doing down here, the air up here tends to get very dirty because it comes in from other countries where their air isn't so clean. And the environmentalists refuse to acknowledge that.
So Mehdi Hassan had tweeted, just quote, "What's wrong with this man?" He spoke for over an hour, and this is at the UN, and he's still, doing other speeches today. But any final thoughts?
I mean, that seems like a short, quick trip to a mental institution. Honestly, no offense to mentally ill people. A lot of them are nicer and more moral than him. But that's just bizarre. What are we doing with our hands? What are we amorphously shaping? Why is he explaining to us that our air is strong and clean when it's not, as he, pulls us out of every agreement that would make it stronger and cleaner at a time when we're dealing with global warming all over the country. And every American knows that global warming is real. There's a few pretending they don't, but that's just to make money. I mean, it's hard to even talk about that because it's just so sad that that man has any leadership position at all.
It is a complete embarrassment. But Larry, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to get you reelected, and we'll make sure to include a link to your website, social media, and Act Blue so people can chip in, support you, and not take any elections here in 2025 for granted.
Well, thank you, Adam. I really enjoyed it, and we'll do it again sometime.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.